Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Share and Learn, our third session in City ICP, and it's great to have you all with us today. My name's Tracy Tyrrell. I am a Deputy Clinical Lead for the ICP, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to this session. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be hearing a presentation for 20 minutes, and then we're going to encourage you to post questions into our chat box, and then I'll be obviously asking our presenter to answer those. We may be joined by Hugh Porter, our lead for the ICP, for our question time. We've just got some IT glitches, so bear with us at the moment. But I'm really delighted to welcome Jules today, who is the Chief Executive of Nottingham CVS. And I'm going to hand over now to Jules, who's going to present to us for around 20 minutes. So welcome, Jules.
Thank you, Tracy. And hello, everyone. Very good to not see you today. But anyway, thank you for coming and listening to the presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it and hope you have some questions. Just a little bit of background about Nottingham Community and Voluntary Service. We were founded in 1875, so we're more than 145 years old now, and primarily we delivered non-workhouse services to the poor. I don't have a lot more detail than that, but we have been around serving Nottingham citizens for a very long time. We formally incorporated as the Council for Voluntary Service in 1998, and we have changed our name to Nottingham Community and Voluntary Service in 2009 to better reflect the actual work that we do within communities. We are called an infrastructure organisation. What that means is we don't deliver things directly to the poor or otherwise, but we help those organisations that are in the community, working every day, charities, social enterprises, voluntary and community organisations. We help them to operate more efficiently, to help them find funding, to help them with their policies and procedures. So the only thing that you might know us for, or that we're most popular for, is brokering volunteering, and that's quite a central role to what we do. We help people to find opportunities, and we help those organizations to get good volunteers. So I'll move on. So our vision is to have a thriving voluntary and community sector in Nottingham, because that will help improve the quality of people's lives in the city. Many community-based organizations, whether they have paid staff or they're run completely by volunteers, are really at the heart of helping Nottingham's most vulnerable citizens, and all citizens really, because volunteers and voluntary sector organizations are anything from community sports coaches down to helping young people with their school lessons in after-school clubs. So, that's the beauty of the voluntary sector, and sometimes the difficulty to try to explain is that we are broad as well as deep, and there's lots of different types of organizations and lots of different people involved. And our mission is to support the voluntary community social enterprise organizations and groups to grow their capacity, to help them be capable and sustainable. We want to increase the scale, scope and impact of volunteering, and we want to be a strong strategic voice for the sector. Those are the fundamental things about what a good infrastructure organization looks to do. Now, our key priorities, and if I go back to those three things, a thriving sector, how do we do that? We have training and learning programs. As you can imagine, when we're working with children or adults at risk, safeguarding is a massive area of work that voluntary organizations need to be on top of, because we need to be sure that we're delivering services to citizens in a safe way. So we have a very comprehensive training program around safeguarding that we deliver through various means. We have a designated safeguarding lead network, almost like a community of practice, where people get together, share their learning and their experiences, perhaps have the support of their peers around sticky situations that they might find themselves in. So that's been going for quite a while. But we also deliver other kind of training and around governance, around legal structures, all the things that you need in order to run your organization. And it could be something as simple as sitting with our communications officer for half an hour and her giving you some advice on your Facebook page. And that's, again, that's about that holistic support for the sector. Sustainability is quite important. I don't know how many of you really know or are familiar with how voluntary organizations get their money. Often that is through funding. For instance, the lottery is probably one of the biggest funders of community activity in the city at the moment. City Council also, still surprisingly, as most city councils have completely withdrawn all of their funding for the voluntary community sector, Nottingham has maintained a fairly good level of support in that area. However, lottery is coming in as a very, very close second and a really important part of Nottingham's voluntary and community landscape. And there'll be other places. There's a community foundation which issues small grants, and there's grants for every level of activity, and in some cases people do direct fundraising from the public. And we can help with all of those sort of things. We can review bids, we deliver top tips on writing a funding application, and those sort of things that are quite practical, I suppose. We help people understand what their legal obligations are if they become a trustee of a charity, for instance. We help with volunteer recruitment. That's a really big thing, because if we want a volunteer to be placed with an organization, we need to be really, really sure that that organization has the means and the ability to really look after that volunteer. And if there's a volunteer working or supporting a paid staff member, to make really clear what their roles are, so that we're not using voluntary support to take over what should be or would be considered paid work. And that I'll talk about that a little bit more. We do some bespoke advice and consultancy work. For instance, we're now doing a mapping exercise for the Violence Reduction Unit, which entails us going out to talk to communities, finding out what they need, and then feeding that back so that solutions can be found. As I mentioned, volunteering, and I think that last point maybe should be at the top, we need to put the volunteers at the heart of volunteering. So it is really all about the volunteers' experience. While the organization gains and benefits from having volunteers, the volunteer needs to get something out of this as well, whether that's a feeling of feeling needed or wanted or part of something bigger than themselves. It could be as simple as maybe getting some confidence because you need to get back into the labor market. You've been away from the labor market or don't have much experience at work. People can often use volunteering as a soft way back into trying to get into the labor market. But we offer advice on recruiting volunteers. We're running now a workshop on how to write a good role description for a volunteer, because it's really important that when volunteer comes to you, just like a job description, that their role description should be really clear, sets out their priorities, what their areas of work are. And we also need these organizations to be looking at best practice, have training available for volunteers if that's what they need. And often, if an organization isn't set up correctly, they might find that they have a high turnover of volunteers. So we try to work with them to say, you might need to be more flexible, you might need to be more clear about what you expect volunteers to do. And in some places, you will have volunteers that will have been volunteering in the same place for nearly a lifetime. So we've got a great mix, and we've got a great variety and a lot of reasons why people volunteer. And I bet many of you on the call have volunteered in one capacity or another throughout your life. And it really is, it's a great way to give something back to your community. And I think it's important to recognize as well that volunteering can be formal, where you get matched up with an organization, you work together, or it can be quite informal. It could be just getting groceries for your neighbor if they aren't able to get out of the house. And we've seen lots and lots and lots of that community spirit come throughout the pandemic. And I think it is important to recognize that volunteering is a way to really, I guess it's a way to embed yourself in your community if that's what you want to do. And I think it's just a really great expression of the great spirit that happens in this country. It's from young to old, there's many opportunities to volunteer and do good stuff. So a connected sector, and I think this is where our role really develops within the Integrated Care Partnership, and I think our involvement in the ICP from its very early stages, I would say, of getting together, has been to really ensure that the voluntary sector has an equal seat at the table, because the voluntary sector, while it is diverse, many of our organizations are quite small. Less than 10 members of staff, some running entirely on volunteers only, some quite big ones, but when we sit at the table with these larger institutions like the City Council and the Health Service, oftentimes it can seem a bit intimidating to sit around in those big systems. We are an integral part of the system. It's just, we have to make sure, and that's one of our roles at NCVS, is to make sure that the voluntary sector is really embedded within the system so that we all work together towards good outcomes for Nottingham citizens. And I think that it's that we run provider networks, we provide a voice for the sector. For instance, right from here, I'll be joining the Health and Wellbeing Board, so that again, there's a place where I can ensure that the voice of the voluntary sector is represented at that strategic level. And we run all kinds of campaigns. We try to influence change. We represent on a number of strategic boards. So what have we been successful at? I would say, well, in the first part of the lockdown, within a matter of weeks, we were able to recruit over 1,000 volunteers that wanted to help. And it was really quite incredible. We had people doing dog walking and shopping and dropping off prescriptions, telephoning people that were isolating, and it was just so powerful. The messages were incredible, and the feedback from people that were being helped is just amazing. It really helped glue people together, I think, in a way that we've not seen before. And unfortunately, it's taken a pandemic to do that. But I think what it's also done is it's brought forward really the fact that the voluntary and community sector is kind of always there under the surface, if you will, just busily going along doing its thing. But when the crisis hit, to see the outpouring of people just wanting to be involved, wanting to help, wanting to feel like they were doing something useful, it was overpowering for us, really, and it was quite heartwarming as well. Our next activity is helping to recruit volunteer stewards for the 7 vaccination sites around the county. I think registrations are actually closed at the minute because we had so many people come forward at once, but that will be an ongoing and sustained activity. As we know, the vaccination will be going on for quite a number of months, so we'll keep refreshing that ask and that offer. We do other things. We've probably helped groups bring in many hundreds of thousands of pounds, if not millions of pounds over the years, in external funding that is additional to money that's in the system and in the city. So we're good at being able to lever in resources from other places. We're working with partners to roll out the green social prescribing pilot, and that'll come on board in April, and helping people really get out, enjoy nature, and make them, make sure their health and mental well-being is looked after, and using nature in order to do that. And it'd be really great if you have the opportunity, through the early part of the pandemic, I think we interviewed about 15 organizations to see how they were responding in terms of, changing their services, doing things differently, people they were serving. Some, in fact, just turning their services on their head, to finding ways to help the people that they help in their communities. So we've got the community action stories on the volunteering section of our website, and I suggest you go, at your lunchtime, sit there and just watch the amazing stories unfold. So areas that we could potentially development. One of the things we're looking at, at the moment we're in a big city center building. That building is not going to be ours for very much longer. We've decided to sell it because we want to have a greater presence out in communities, delivering maybe through the community hubs, the satellite centers that are opening, the primary, involving the primary care networks, and really getting out and delivering in a different kind of way. We're looking to collaborate with other organizations such as ourselves to make sure we all play to our own strengths, that we don't duplicate services, and that we can address where there are gaps in the sector and have more joined up support. And we're looking at more different kind of advocacy for the sector. We're making very good use of our website and our e-bulletin at the moment to get messages out about the kind of appeals where people are looking for various bits of PPE. We've matched together a company making face masks with organizations who needed face masks for their volunteers. And, doing that kind of thing is really important to make sure that the sector is connected in at every level, and that we're making use of all the means and resources that we have to support those organizations. So our specific role in the ICP, and as I said, we've been in the development of the ICP almost since the beginning. Jane Todd, who some of you may know as the former chief exec of Nottingham City Council and our former chief exec at NCVS before I took the role on a full-time capacity, she represents the sector on behalf of NCVS, and she sits on the ICP executive and steering groups. It's really important to have her insight and feedback at that level. We do feel that we have an equal seat at this table, and in fact, the voluntary sector, and it's not just NCVS that represent the voluntary sector on the ICP. We've got at various levels, we've got Health Watch, we've got Nottingham Counselling Service, Framework, Nottingham City Care Partnership. All of us really are third sector or voluntary sector charities, etc. We do come, as I said, we come in many different forms and sizes, and sometimes with many different names. So, but if you ever have any questions about any of that stuff, please do feel free to get in touch. As a result of an event that we did with Health Watch last year, we were able to influence some of the ICP's current priorities, particularly around severe and multiple disadvantage and around Black and Asian minority health inequalities. And in fact, NCVS leads that work stream on health inequalities for the Black and Asian minority ethnic population in Nottingham. And we help the ICP to have access to some of the city's most diverse communities through various boards and forums that we either facilitate or represent at. And we've recently helped get some of those communities together to solve some problems that are happening within communities, especially around, we have some aversion to vaccinations, perhaps not just good engagement with health systems at all, not doing early screening of problems. And so we're trying to collect all those communities together, and there's been some funding through NHS Charities Together that's come down into the system, and hopefully we'll be able to get money out to those organizations so that they can work with their various service users and population groups to get good, active messages and positive messages about interacting with health and the system. And another one of our roles is that as life evolves, commissioning happens, There are opportunities for voluntary organizations to deliver public services. One of our jobs will make sure that they're prepared to take part in that service delivery by making sure they have the right systems and processes in place. Those of you that might be in the room that are working with people with severe multiple disadvantage, which, as I said, is an ICP priority, we do have a practice development unit that we host at Nottingham CVS. There is an online hub that's free to join. There are many, many workshops and activities taking place over the year. So you're welcome to please join that. I believe these slides will all be shared afterwards. And so yeah, just sign up and see what's available to you, because there's some really good learning and development opportunities. And I think that's it. I might just be exactly on time. So yes, if you want to volunteer or find out more about the voluntary sector, just visit our website, and please get in touch with me directly if you have any questions.
That's lovely, Jules. Thank you. Great presentation. So we've got some comments and questions. Obviously, firstly, thank you for a great presentation. You're absolutely right. We will be sharing the presentation and the link out actually to the live recording from today. That will go out on Twitter. And it'll also go out in various newsletter and forms. So yeah, so people can watch it again or share it with colleagues. So one of the first questions is around thinking about the primary care networks in the city. And you obviously in your presentation talked about the new social prescribing. You talked about some of the work you were doing with social prescribing. So I think the questions around, you know, how do we best link some of these roles, such as social prescribing link workers, into the local community and voluntary sector organisations?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it does. It is one of the things that's probably helped us shape why we would like to be more present out in communities, because some organizations are quite ready to take link workers and people on social prescription and have that dialogue, but there are other organizations who might be a bit timid about that, or maybe feel it's not for them. So I guess it's about us being an intermediary in that space to kind of say, well, actually, and this is one of the things we're hoping to do through the green social prescribing, is actually work with those small providers to say, well, what do you actually need to help you get ready to take some more referrals, and then help facilitate how they get to that point. So that is what I see a role for us being more present out in communities.
That's great, Jules. And just thinking then about how we expand on that. So one of the next questions is really about how we can enhance the links for community specialist sector for long-term condition patients. So in a much more wider area, and think about using proof of concept. So really keen to hear your views and thoughts on that from obviously your role within the NCVS.
Yeah, I think that's again a good question, and it's about really, it's where's that link between that person that needs to maybe get out and do some things to be proactive about managing their condition, and linking them with those organizations, and I think the link workers are a very good way to do that, and again, we're looking at some of that through some of the new models and ways of working for mental health commissioning around social prescribing, as well as the green social prescribing, to make sure that people feel confident. So, you know, we're looking at things like green buddies, or people that can maybe go with someone for the first time to a session, to settle them in, to make them comfortable, to make sure that the place they've gone is the right place for them as well. 'Cause I think we always have to recognize that people are people, and just because we refer somebody to some place doesn't mean it's going to be a good fit, because they might not know till they get there. So I think that's part of this as well, about that flexibility in the system. And I think that's where the voluntary sector does have a part to play, because we can be more flexible than a system, than the larger systems. And I think that's where we really need to adapt our role to say, well, okay, system, we know that you can't move quickly, but if we do these things, you know, these small bits of things linking people together, we can help then that system to achieve its purpose.
That's great, Jules, thank you. So another question really, just obviously you've given us an interesting presentation, but just thinking about what are your top priorities, Jules, in your leadership role working with the ICP over the next 12 months?
I guess it's to, again, ensure that the voluntary sector is represented in the best way possible. And it's not always just about the voluntary sector coming with cap in hand, looking for money. It's about where are the effective places we can work together to make sure the system is as robust, as viable as possible, because we know budgets are shrinking everywhere. So if we all pool our collective knowledge and we make sure that we have the right people doing the right things at the right time, and to have the best outcome for citizens. So I guess it's me always being honest about the voluntary sector and what its, you know, what its greatness is, but also its limitations. And as long as my peers around different sectors will do the same, and I think then we'll come out with something really great.
Lovely, thanks, Jules. So obviously somebody's sharing that, you know, that obviously we've got a knowledge around your involvement in promoting support groups which are run by a wide diversity of individuals, and just asking, really recognising the impact of COVID on those, and anything that you'd suggest in your role to help us to consider perhaps in a wider, you know, in the wider ICP actions that we can take.
Yeah, well, one of the things I mentioned earlier was about working with some of the very diverse communities. We've seen, and someone mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, trying to get early cancer screening, for instance, in Nottingham to be better for the last 10 years, and the needle hasn't moved. But if we work through community leaders and those people that have the ear and the respect of the people in their communities to give them positive, good information. So that might be, we can get the Council of Mosques to get 40 people together in a room but have someone introduced, you know, from the health authority that it has the trust of the local mosque. So you know, that's just a very practical example, but I think it's about investing out front in a preventative way in communities, and then we'll reap rewards, you know, on the system from the other side.
That's great, Jules, and that probably takes us into our last question because we're running out of time, but which is really just about those seldom heard communities, and we know obviously that we need as a system to reach out, and so just really keen to gather your feedback about what we can do differently in the ICP to really reach out to some of those communities that we don't naturally are able to engage with effectively.
Yeah, well, we have made a bit of a start. There's something called the Nottingham Together Board, which has arisen as a check and challenge board, really, to say, okay, citizens, your local authority looked after you. Did we do a good enough job? So out of that grew a really important need to look at where the most serious impact was on those communities. So there's a subgroup that's now become a reference group for some of the work in the ICP, most particularly around the health inequality strand, but of course it can go across a number of things. And I guess it's just constantly refreshing. Do we have the right people in the room? Who else is missing? And if we're constantly reflecting and asking that question and inviting that broad, diverse group of people, I think eventually, and it's really is about bolstering the knowledge and the confidence of those community leaders, community organizations, to be able to have those conversations and draw people in to help us create solutions for them.
Thank you, Jules, and I think that concludes all of the questions, and we're about on time. So thank you for a great presentation. It's been great, and thank you to everybody for being with us at this Share and Learn session. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you at our next session. So thank you, everybody.